Hi again and welcome to the channel. Today I'm going to do some more predictions for 2020, and I'm making these predictions today on the 5th of November 2019. I have already made some videos about what will happen for the UK elections, for America and American elections, but we'll be looking at those issues again later in the year when I do a summary at the end of 2019. But today I'm going to focus on a number of events that I feel are going to be of very great importance for 2020, and I'm also going to focus a little bit on India and that region and the Far East as well. Now, the first area of my focus will be the Middle East, and I've already made a number of predictions about this in the past, and I'm going to look at some of those again because I feel that many of those are beginning to become more relevant now. Now, one of the most difficult things when you're making predictions is to get the timing right. You know, sometimes I get the feeling of something and I might push it away as saying that was a wrong prediction, I got it wrong, and then a little bit further along sometimes that thing will come true. Now, I think this is something that happens to all seers, I suppose we could call ourselves here, and in particular happened to Nostradamus. For example, Nostradamus, most people think of as an astrologer and that he did everything through astrology very carefully. But in actual fact, as an astrologer, he wasn't that good, actually, particularly in the beginning, because he used to ask people to bring their charts with them when he gave them a forecast. And sometimes when he had to cast them himself, he would often get them wrong. So a lot of the astrologers of the time were a bit dismissive of Nostradamus. But his skill, I feel, was because he also had this psychic insight. And what he used to do is use his psychic insights to look at the astrological charts and then say, I can see similar patterns in the planets and stars here to what happened to a similar historic event centuries ago, you know. So he was comparing old charts with what's happening in the future and would say, Mars is in this position and Venus is in this position at that battle, and that could apply to the future too. But even he had a lot of difficulty dating things. That's why you'll find in Nostradamus's work that there aren't any dates in his work. Some people think there are hidden dates in the chapters and the indexes and things like this, but the quatrains don't actually have any dates to them. So forgive me with my dates sometimes. Often I feel something's going to happen for 2000 and whatever, and it comes a little bit later. So these predictions I'm making at the moment, I get the feeling the seeds of them are happening within 2020, and I think we'll see more about these issues that I'm going to raise here in the near future. Now, these are not Nostradamus's predictions, these are my predictions that I'm making here, but you'll understand that sometimes us psychic people obviously know a little bit about Nostradamus, Edgar Cayce. I know about the Eastern predictions, and these things do have a influence upon what we say, but more afterwards. It's like I get a sense of what's going to happen, and then later on I might spot it in Nostradamus and think, God, you know, that's just like I thought, you know. So these are my thoughts. Now, in 2015, I made a video about what will happen in the Middle East, and a lot of that seems to be happening. And you can reference that on my website, or I'll leave better still, I'll leave you a link in the description below, that those that want to follow this up. And I did predict a few things that seem to be happening now. And one of the things that I've been feeling strongly, and I did say this last year too, is that there's going to be a conflict between Saudi Arabia and Iran. Now, my feelings have been, when Trump first went to Saudi Arabia, when he first got his presidency, one of the first countries he went to was Saudi Arabia. And I got a really strong feeling that a deal had been done for the long term. I feel for something to be done in his second presidency, okay, his second term of office. That's in the American predictions if you listen to those as well. But I'll leave those in the link as well below. But my feeling was that the deal's already been done between Saudi Arabia and America. And recently we had Aramco. I was just looking down to my notes because I can never get the name right, but you remember the big oil industry that they have in Saudi Arabia? They recently sold off some of their assets, and my sense has been that the deal is being done to sell off assets, oil assets, possibly to American buyers, in order to exchange this for arms. And I'm feeling a really big increase in arms buying from Saudi Arabia. It's as if they want to become the leader of the Middle East, and they're going to spend their money on making sure that they've got the clout to bully everybody else. At the same time, Iran is already under pressure to reduce its nuclear weapons, alleged nuclear weapons, its nuclear industry, put it that way. And I feel the pressure is going to be ramped up through 2020 like never before. It's going to be pushed upon them so that all opportunities for Iran to trade with other people are reduced tremendously. And there's going to be, because of this, oil wars. There's going to be more and more terrorism between Iran and Saudi Arabia. And Saudi Arabia is going to move its focus now from Yemen. I don't see so much destruction happening in Yemen, but I do feel that the focus is going to be much more on a conflict between Saudi Arabia and Iran. Now, eventually, this will turn into something much more serious, but not in 2020, I feel. But I do feel that we will see the seeds of this because Russia is going to get involved, and this is where the problem occurs, because Russia is going to be in a much more aggressive stance through 2020, also in cahoots with China, and I'm going to talk about that in a moment. I just want to check my notes that I've said everything to you. And there also will be tensions also. Now, Turkey was another issue that I was talking about before as well, because I said in 2019 that Turkey would make intrusions into Syria, which has happened. And again, I feel conflicts between Turkey in this whole situation as well, and Pakistan getting involved. Now, Pakistan is going to be compromised a bit, because it's in a position where, is it an Arab country or is it on the side of America, and so on. And there's simultaneously conflicts happening in the future, I feel, and I think this is going to happen in 2020. This is my gut feeling, that there will be a conflict eventually between India and Pakistan. But I'm going to map that out for you a little bit. Now, I don't feel all this is going to sort of suddenly be in 2020 and we're going to have this mad period of global conflicts, but we can see the seeds in 2020, and obviously I'll be giving updates on my videos as we go along. Now, in the past I've also made specific videos about China and what will happen in China. And in 2017 I made a prediction saying that, and this was a fairly detailed prediction about this, that there would be a revolution in China. And as soon as we see the what's been happening now in 2019 with all these riots in Hong Kong, obviously I want to re-look at those predictions that I made then, and because I feel this is still happening, I feel I'm correct with that prediction, and that this Hong Kong thing is part of a much broader change to China. Now, I'm going to refresh some of the things that I said before and also talk about them now, because I feel this is relevant to what's happening. Because what's happening in Hong Kong is just the start. It's not the end of things. This is not going to fizzle out. I do sense that eventually China will send in troops to Hong Kong. And this is going to cause more trouble in other areas of China, because simultaneously we start to get problems in another area of China. Now, the area that I was talking about before, and I don't know much about Chinese politics or anything, but I was just seeing the northeast of China. That there's an area there. I know that a lot of the Islamic people get suppressed in China, but I get the feeling that some of these smaller groups that are being suppressed are going to start to revolt. They're going to start seeing what's happening in Hong Kong and start to also make noises. Now, a large part of this problem, as it were, is also happening because simultaneously I see President Trump not just bringing in more embargoes against China in the way he has been with this trade war, but I see that the Chinese-American trade getting to the point where it is almost nothing. It's going down to a trickle. This will be brought in incrementally, but I do feel that eventually we get a point where America says, you either trade with us or you trade with China. Here's your choice. You've got no option. We're not going to trade with China. And he's going to use things like the Hong Kong riots and the other riots that I feel will be appearing in China and Tibet, that will act as a catalyst to bring in this huge embargo against China. Now, what will happen in China, I feel, is that there's going to be a revolution in China that will ultimately be a revolution that will completely transform the country into a true democracy. And although we see lots of riotous things, and the things that I'm saying here, you when I say they move troops in and things and people rising up, I'm not seeing, strangely enough, a revolution that is full of bloodshed. To me, it feels like it's a social force that changes the country for the good. And I'm very interested in a man called Sun Yat-sen, and in particular because some of the relatives of Sun Yat-sen have been to see my wife Jane. So we've been in the presence of the energy of Sun Yat-sen's spirit, I feel. Now, Westerners don't know much about this man, but he was a great political thinker before Mao, and envisaged a democratic China. And he lived in Hawaii for a while and came and visited America and based a political system based upon the ideas that are in the American Constitution. And he formed something for China like this. Unfortunately, history did not give him the chance. But I feel this is going to come round again. And his name is well known in China as the father of the nation, they would call him. But his political ideology has been in some ways suppressed. He's still a great man because they can't get rid of that idea, but his ideas still are there under the surface. And I feel that in China we're going to see this revolution that's going to help the world at large in the end. So this is not a bad thing, it's a good thing. I'm just going to look at my notes just to make sure I've got everything, I've said everything that I wanted to say here. Okay, one other point with this is that Russia and China, now I've mentioned this in my 2017 video about this, but Russia and China, because of the trade alliance, trade embargoes that I saw coming for China, which are happening, and similar trade embargoes ultimately will happen with Russia, because we're going to get Russia intervening in the Middle East and we're going to get problems there. I see much more trade between Russia and China, much more trade in terms of military goods as well. Is not particularly good for the world, and I think it will be a worrying thing where Russia is trading arms for other products and technology. But ultimately, my feeling is that the Chinese thing will give people a lot of concern, a lot of cause for concern, but ultimately will work out for the good. Now, I'm going to move on and also talk a little bit about Tibet, because that's very much interlinked with China. So I'm talking here also a lot about longer term predictions. So long term, China will become a much more democratic force in the world. I feel that their dominance of the world economically will be less, and I see the rise of India, which I'll talk about later. But I want to now just talk a little bit about Tibet and my thoughts about Tibet. Okay, more coming up in a moment, but if you enjoy this, please do also read my books that I've spent a lot of time and effort writing. Books about the future, books about destiny and what happens to us after death as well. The ones that I think you would find most interesting is Messages from the Universe. And this is all about destiny and the extraordinary story of what happened to me when I went to India to ask about my future. And this is a real mind blower as a book, and I think you'd enjoy it for a Christmas present. And similarly, What to Do When You're Dead is my book about the afterlife and what happens when we die and what happens after death and what the afterlife world is like. These two books are two of my favourites that I've written. And they've been translated into lots of different languages, you'll see from my behind me here. So yeah, that's just a little plug for that, and I hope you will comment sometimes as well if you've read the book, because I find it mind-boggling, some of the things that I discovered there in India about destiny. You know, is destiny fixed? And this is what triggered me to look into these whole ideas about doing predictions, because it was in 2014, I think it was, that I went to India, and that's when I started making my predictions soon after that. Okay, let's move on and do some more predictions for you. I think you can see why now I'm splitting the predictions this year up into different videos, because I'll be giving you a 4-hour video otherwise, because I'm trying to cover a lot of things this year, and in particular looking at the longer term future of some of these countries and places and events. Now, one of the countries I want to talk about now is Tibet, because that's very much integrated into this whole idea of this Chinese revolution that I envisage happening. And I talked about Tibet before. I got particularly interested in Tibet personally when I was asked to write a book about it by one of my publishers some years ago, and it shocked me to know the extent of the evil things that were done to the Tibetan people in their own country. Obviously the Dalai Lama talks about these things a lot, but I don't think he really puts across the message of the terrible things that were done to the nuns and the monks in Tibet, and the humiliating, torturous things that were done to them, particularly in the early days of when Mao and that was in power. But so anyway, he's always talked about taking the middle path, taking the middle way, and doing a non-violent path to liberate Tibet. And up to a point it's worked. But my feeling with Tibet is that on the death of the Dalai Lama, and I don't feel he's going to die for a while yet, but you know, he's getting older, he's having illnesses. But my feeling is that on the death of the Dalai Lama, he's going to say that I'm not going to incarnate again. But the Dalai Lama will be secretly brought up in India and kept away from the public eye. As far as everyone knows, there will be no final, he would be the 15th Dalai Lama, the next one, wouldn't it? Was he the 15th? I can't remember now. But the next Dalai Lama will be brought up in secret. Now the problem will be that China will try to hoist their own Dalai Lama onto Tibet, and this will cause troubles. It will cause uprising. It will cause a form of terrorism against property as opposed to people. It will still be non-violent, but it will be things like attacks upon the railway system that goes into Tibet now, attacks upon the dams and things like this. There will be more terrorist type of activities, and I feel this will happen after the death of the Dalai Lama, but by that time China has begun to get this new democracy that I spoke about, and although it won't let go entirely of Tibet at first, I do feel that it will allow Tibet to become an autonomous region, and then fairly quickly after that I feel that Tibet gets its full separation from China. And the strange thing about Tibet is that I see a future for Tibet where Tibet no longer does not have a government in the same sense that other countries have. I feel that Tibet is going to do something very unusual in that it's going to declare itself as a country that is owned by the world rather than owned by the Tibetan people. It's going to make Tibet itself into a sort of national park. Now I know the Dalai Lama did speak about something like this. He's talked about turning the country's side into a national park, but it's going to be sort of like a spiritual place that is there for the world and has no government as sort, just an administrator of these religious and spiritual type things. And it's not going to be just Buddhist, it's going to open itself to the idea that it becomes a spiritual place for the world to visit. So we will see in Tibet the world going to Tibet for their retreats on a big spiritual scale. And that will be Christian people, that will be Islam, it will be Hindus, it will be open to the world for a multi-faith place that Tibet will become the spiritual centre for. This is part of the progress towards what I will feel happen in our lifetimes of a world where a new form of consciousness is awakening, particularly in the East. And particularly in India, which will even trump what's happening there. But these are the things I feel for Tibet. So I feel a good future for Tibet eventually, but a difficult time before. But this whole revolution we're seeing happening in Hong Kong is going to have major effects through China, and then eventually, not in 2020, but a little bit further along, we're going to see things happening in the Tibetan plateau where all sorts of new things are going to happen, including much more aggressive resistance to occupation. Now, I also want to briefly mention North Korea, because things have settled down there a bit towards the end of 2019, but the problem has not gone away. I hold by my earlier predictions with North Korea in that Kim Jong-un will be deposed by his own people. That man at some point will be dragged from power. I feel he will basically do a runner, and he will try to escape and hide away in China. So this is his position is going to get weaker because China is in such a volatile state and going to be less supportive of him, even though to them too he's a problem. But I feel with that whole situation there in North Korea, what we're going to see is eventually, like I say, he will be deposed by his own people. And after that, we will see gradually the reunification of North and South Korea. But again, not 2020 for this, but again, we're going to see the beginnings of more dissent within North Korea, whatever news we might get of it. But we're going to certainly hear more news reports of dissent amongst the generals, more executions of people that disagree with him and so on. We'll be seeing the signs of him being deposed. Now, those that know me and those that read my books will know that I have a great love of India, and I'll be going to India again in 2020 to see a number of what they call Siddha yogis and a guru over there who's asked me to go over there and write some books about these people, and interestingly was predicted for me in my Nadi readings, which I talk about in the Messages from the Universe book that I mentioned earlier. So I'm off to India again to do some more work there, and also do some charitable work, I hope, while we're there again, like we did with our foundation before. But I want to talk a little bit now about India too, because I've kind of talked about the East a little bit more with these predictions, and you can see why I can't put them all into one video. I mean, they'd be too long. So last year I made some specific predictions about India, and I made a video about India, and I got it right about Modi. I said that Modi would be re-elected, and at that point, you know, it was uncertain that he would be re-elected. And some of the things that I spoke about, I talked about a huge clean-up of India. These things have been decided by Modi too. I talked about they were going to have a war on the litter and trash that's all over India, and Modi has done that type of thing. I said there'd be an assassination attempt on Modi, but I was wrong with that. But there were a number of foiled attempts at assassination of him, quite a few. So I was kind of right, but it didn't happen, thank goodness, because I feel that Modi will be a very, very powerful force in India. Now, to the rest of us, we might think, oh, he's just the Prime Minister of India, the President of India, it doesn't matter, But I feel this man is setting a new precedent in a way that countries can work. He is kind of keeping out the big international companies and keeping the smaller businesses in business, as it were. He's not allowing the big, huge global interests to go in, and instead of having a whole row of street sellers, we have one Tesco's or Sainsbury's. It's not going to work like that. And I get this feeling with India that India is going to develop a new model of guidance for the world, both economically and spiritually, because in the future I feel that India is going to be the most powerful country in the world. India had a glorious past, but it will have an even more glorious future. We'll also see more spiritualization of the West. America will become much more spiritual, seeing the folly really of following endless materialism, and how endless materialism ultimately brings very sad people who feel that there's always something missing because they've not got that spiritual side. And similarly, India has been all spiritual, but the food's missing and the hygiene's missing. So we're getting the best of both worlds, as Aldous Huxley said. So I feel that in the future, India is going to be very important, and I feel India is going to be more and more in the news, because with the shutdown of China, more industry is going to want to move to India to take advantage of its labour. And there's going to be certain restrictions put upon how people can manufacture in India, with much more focus gradually upon making cleaner industries and more humane industries with proper unions and this type of thing. So there's going to be a gradual growth of India, which we're going to see beginning as China fades. But there's also a lot of problems with India, particularly the main problem, and I feel this is for 2020, there's going to be much more of a clash between India and Pakistan. We have two nuclear countries who are at loggerheads with each other here, nuclear bombed countries with nuclear bombs. So it's a very dangerous and potentially hugely volatile for the whole world. But I feel there's going to be a conflict between India and Pakistan, but in a sort of way that's going to be like this. This is how I see it. I see Pakistan being in a compromised position, because what will happen in 2020, and I said I wasn't going to give the dates to this, but I feel it's happening in 2020, is going to be in a compromised position with what's happening with Saudi Arabia. And Pakistan is going to be in a position, like I said earlier, are you with America, or you and Saudi, or are you with Iran? And I feel they're going to move against Iran. They're anti-Iran. But at the same time, I'm seeing conflicts on both borders there, because I'm seeing India kind of taking advantage of a comparatively weak position that Pakistan is put into. And I see them trying to expand their borders. I see India expanding its borders, possibly in northern parts between Nepal and Kashmir, more influence happening there to try to take the Pakistani influence there, and also in the Punjab. I get the sense that India may get some extra territory, but it doesn't seem to come through war. It seems to come through economic and political pressure somehow, and possibly some troops, but not in a huge way. So it's a bit contradictory as I'm saying this, because I see it in a strange way. I feel it's almost, the way I would describe it, if I was Nostradamus, I would think I'd say it with more of a way of like, it's done by clever moves. Something clever is done. It's done by subterfuge somehow that we seem to get this. I also feel that Bangladesh one day will become part of India, and I've said that in my earlier talks here. And even actually Tibet will ultimately become under the jurisdiction of India in the far future, not now but further ahead, as India's influence gets stronger and stronger in the region. Eventually I feel that Pakistan and India will settle down, they will see they will see eye to eye in the end. But just coming up, I feel in the next few years there's going to be more conflict there. I'm just looking at my notes to check that I've covered everything here. Now, I've pretty much given most of what I wanted to say there, I think. So, but I do feel this is going to be much more in our news as time goes on, and I do feel that India will become an example to the world eventually, a new way of doing things that many of us will model our industries on. It's going to be less of the globalization, less of the big companies, much more focused on the opportunities of the individual to make their few rupees or make their small businesses work. You know, it's like it's taking on the entrepreneurial spirit of the ordinary man. And this is why India begins to thrive, where other countries become almost all the same shop fronts we see, don't we? We see all the same high streets. Sometimes I walk through England and I think I could be in America, and I walk through Italy and I think, well, this could be America too. We've got all the same brands everywhere, the plastic signs and the rest of it. And I feel that India's going to change this. And Nostradamus spoke about India a number of times, which have been interpreted in different ways. He talked about the country of the three, where the three seas meet, and then the three seas meet only in India. And he spoke also about a kind of a spiritual person that would take Thursday as their holy day, who would become a spiritual light for the world. So I do feel that in time that there will be a great awakening in India that will be also have its kind of, you know, it's not necessarily a Hindu thing either. It's partly, it embraces Christianity as much as it does Hinduism as such, although Hinduism's, it's not strictly Hinduism, it's like the Sanatana Dharma, this universal knowledge. But there's something that I feel comes out of India that will be the hope for the world, you know. And we do have all these conflicts happening that I talked about in the Middle East, and those are going to grow over the years. We're seeing the start in 2020. But I think we're also seeing the start of this spiritual awakening right now, right in 2020. This is going to be a very important year for spiritual progress. And that's why I've kind of put these predictions as one of my earlier groups of predictions before I do more for 2020 later, because I do feel we are at a time of great hope. We are at a time of spiritual awakening, worldwide spiritual awakening, because the world, I feel, is really hungry for spiritual knowledge. And we are all becoming sick and tired of living and eating out of plastic, eating plastic food that tastes almost like, sometimes some of this food in some of these places tastes like I'm eating polystyrene, you know, and all this cheap throwaway society. And I feel that India in particular will be one of the places that will help to bring us back to the values of the simple things, and yet also help us to turn inwardly to find that spiritual side within us. And as I put those thoughts out there, I just want you to think about this, because you know, our thoughts are things. We can change the world through the way we think about it. You know, upon what we focus our attention grows in strength. So when you see difficult things happening in the world, look beyond it. Look to the idea that this is all part of the birth of consciousness. This is all part of humanity waking up, ultimately. It's not a desperate, despairing thing when we see horrible things in the news. Look to the positive, because ultimately we're all here for only one reason, and that is to awaken. Well, I hope you enjoyed all that. Coming up in a minute, I'm going to put a little clip at the end of what I'm going to call flashbacks. Each video, I'm going to put a little flashback to something that Jane and myself have done in the past, or an outtake or something like that. Something, just a little snippet, sometimes related to the video you've just seen, sometimes not. You'll see this time, actually, you're going to see some clips of us when we were first doing our predictions on Channel 4. with Bob Geldof's wife then, Paula Yates. So look out for that. That'll be at the end. And if you do enjoy this, don't forget, please follow this channel, because if you click the little bell thing down there, you'll get updates all the time. And leave your comments, because it's so interesting to get your ideas and your feedback and your criticism as well sometimes. But you know, I feel like this channel is becoming a little bit like a forum for us all too, and I do try to answer where I can. And if you want to know your future, of course, you can contact myself or my team, and we do offer psychic readings by telephone for most countries around the world. So you can go on the website at psychics.co.uk, and you'll follow the links from this and from the description and so forth, and you can find out how to get a reading yourself. And don't forget my book. I've got to plug this again, folks. I've got to make a living. Messages from the Universe, which I'm also working on putting on an audio file later on as well, which is hard going. But here we go. I'll have that up online hopefully soon. Okay, thanks for joining us, and here comes the flashback.